Welcome to us trying something slightly different in the library where we do book talks again in a new and revived format where we try and interview people who wrote books at the University of Baltimore. And we're going to try and record them and make them available afterwards. It's going to be amazing. Thank you for being our guinea pigs. Thank you so especially much. Kyle, for writing a book to be our guinea pigs.
The sole reason.
If you would like to read this book afterwards, the library already has a cataloged copy, which you are free to check out. Hooray. But also, you could buy them from Kyle here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Kyle some questions, interview style, and then we will do audience Q&A, and we have some slides here. So without further ado, hello, I am Mike. I am one of the librarians at the University of Baltimore, and I am joined here by Dr. Kyle Meikle, who has written his second book. Applause! Hooray! So when I describe you to my friends, like when I talk about work, I call you Kyle the film professor. But your PhD and your first book are actually about adaptation and like transmedia or maybe franchises.
Yeah.
So how did we get to a book about the live action animated film? Why did you do this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, to which there are a couple of answers. The first of which is that this book was born of convenience. I pitched this when I was trapped at home with 2 young children during the pandemic. The subject matter was way easier for me to have little co-research. The book is dedicated to them, actually, co-researchers on, because we couldn't really do much else. So it was convenient. Where it came from, though, is, I study adaptation, I study franchises. When you look at franchises, when you look at the top grossing films any given year, they are invariably animated, like in part or in whole. I was just reading today about Zootopia 2, sort of became the highest grossing film this year. Right behind it is Minecraft, which is mixed live action animation. So you're never that far from animation at the box office. And I remembered like many, many moons ago, let's say circa 2008, I had stupidly tweeting while like wandering around DC one Sunday that I thought that Roger Rabbit was the template for most modern blockbusters. And I thought that was a really strange thing. And insofar as it sort of asks you to imagine a world in which live action animation are co-eval. And I was like, that's so weird because it's such a strange film. It is a very, very deeply weird film, and not a lot of films in its wake have looked much like it. So I tweeted that. I didn't think about it until, I studied, was sort of in franchise land, and I thought, well, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to this place where animation becomes the sort of default mode? And then when I started to look, there really wasn't much research out there about why, how connecting the dots between early and weird experiments like Roger Rabbit and a lot of stuff before, which we'll kind of go off at some point, and stuff like Minecraft, the Minecraft movie. And I wanted really desperately to connect those dots.
So both because you were trapped with your children and because you noticed a void in the literature that you thought you could fill.
Okay. Absence in the literature.
Good answer.
And I would say too, I'll just add really quickly that like, studying adaptation, I've been obsessed by binaries. I think all my scholarship, I'm, as many of you know, my parents are Scottish, I'm first generation American, first generation college student. I've always been obsessed by binaries. Literature and film became a primary obsession for me. And then this felt like a logical leap from that because it was thinking about live action and animation as a seemingly stable binary that really is not actually all that stable if you stare at it long enough.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I probably should have explained that by live action animated film, he means films that like mix like a cartoon and real people, et cetera, and other things which we'll talk about. Yeah. Okay, so I think sometimes, maybe some of you in the room have experienced this, that a lot of people out in society like to kind of shit on the arts and cultural studies and say that they're not important and we shouldn't give them money. Why do you think this is something people should care about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, to go back to my first answer, like it's big business, so if you want to follow the money, as so often we are encouraged perhaps to do, it's going to land you in the live action animated sphere. Again, look at the box office returns any given week and look at the box office returns for the century, for the 20th century, the 21st century. This is where the money leads, like inevitably. So I think though on like a grander or broader scale, and it's something that I thought about a lot while writing this book, but did not get into in too much detail, I guess, animation infiltrates every aspect of our life. So like every time you look at your phone, you are dealing with animation, you know, well, like apart from your television, like when you go to the doctor, you are dealing with animation, right? In some way, shape, or form, in ways that seem like invisible, untouchable. And I wanted to sort of think about like, how do we become, and so much of the story of the book is like, how did we become so immune to, in many cases, even recognizing animation as animation, right? Like it is so permissive, and yet we don't often really think of it as a sort of separate category. So I think, you know, being a human is interacting with animation like on a second to second, day-to-day basis. So again, this is a story of how we got there.
Okay, speaking of a story of how we got there, if you read the book, everybody, which I have, or I would be a really bad interviewer choice for this. The book pitches kind of like a three-part model that someone might want to use to think about this topic and its evolution over the whole last like century of films. So could you like explain that model to everybody real quick? And I'll ask a follow-up question later, but like people need to understand that to know if they want to read this book.
Yeah, so like what I was doing in this book was a little bit different from my first book, which is not chronological, was looking at a fixed decade in sort of adaptation and franchise history, 2001 to 2016 or thereabouts. In this book, I'm tracing a far broader arc, you know, as I was saying earlier, like really thinking about weird early experiments. And my goodness, like film was not around long before these experiments started to take place, and like blockbusters as we know them today. So bit by bit, painfully at times, this book kind of coalesced into three distinct moments for me. The first of which is what I kind of labeled the period of integration. So this is a period of synchronization. So this is where, and Anchors Away is the kind of benchmark here. You really are looking at combinations of live action and animation in a technical aspect. A lot of the wonder springs from seeing characters like Jerry Mouse synchronized in lockstep with their live action counterparts, which is truly, truly kind of remarkable. And it's a painstaking process. I mean, this takes months in some cases for animators to sort of achieve. So the first part of the book is really looking at those experiments alongside a kind of parallel path forged by Ray Harryhausen, who does a lot of stop motion stuff. You may remember, you know, dinosaurs, primarily dinosaurs, interacting with live action individuals. And this, for me, again, is much more about sort of finessing the technical aspects of how do we convincingly combine live action and animation, which reaches its apotheosis in Roger Rabbit. Which is a kind of weird presence. I mean, maybe we can talk about this more. I never really devote a full chapter or section to it, and yet it's
No, but it's
covering.
like Roger Rabbit's like all over the book.
It's like
it's kind of like the linchpin of the book.
It
which
is.
is kind of going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So maybe just explain why.
Yeah, so I think I kind of think about that. So then we reach, like I said, this kind of like acme of achievement in Roger Rabbit, which is very convincing, which has a lot to do with, not to get too in the weeds with this, the way that particularly lighting is applied to the characters, obviously to the kind of nascent advent of digital technologies, and this is 1988, this Roger Rabbit, just to give you a sense of the date here. And so a lot of these earlier films, they're very few and far between. They've fallen out of fashion. You get like a Mary Poppins, right? You get, again, some of the Harryhausen stuff, but that's really kind of relegated to B-picture status. Roger Rabbit, by some counts, is the highest grossing film of 1988, and then goes on to be nominated for a slew of Academy Awards. It wins a special sort of Academy Award for its technical achievement and special effects. And then what's fascinating and what I found myself trying to account for is that no other film after it really tries to emulate it. Because 88, you can imagine, we are quickly verging into the kind of digital revolution in movies. So we've already had Terminator, we've had, you know, we're about to get T2. At this particular point in time, Jurassic Park is looming on the horizon. And so people are like, why would we combine live action and 2D when we can more photorealistically integrate these, you know, far out creatures into, you know, the motion pictures. So what we get in the next sort of historical, so synchronization runs up to about Roger Rabbit. I think that chapter actually ends with Paula Abdul, you know, which is where
it does. So for people who are old enough, there's this Paula Abdul music video where she dances with a cat called MC Scat Cat. There's a long explanation of that.
Very,
enjoy it.
A very close reading, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, then we move into the period that I call the period of integration, and this is where you're getting stories that tend to imagine animation and live action as like family, as like friends and family. So before, Usually they're like opposing forces. Even in Anchors Away, actually, they're opposing forces. This is a moment of reconciliation. Reconciliation takes over, and this is really happening as early as something like Casper, which I think gets a really short shrift in talking about the digital revolution, which is all about this friendship between ghost and human, but also I argue between live action and animation. The apotheosis of this period really is the Alvin and the Chipmunks series, where like Dave not only befriends the chipmunks, but eventually adopts them, and the Chipettes as well. So these are films that are, you'll notice, still not striving for like complete photorealism, but they're sort of getting audiences used to the idea of living alongside animation. I talk about it as domestication. It happens in the Flintstones live action remake as well. And then a bunch of other stuff that's based on Saturday morning cartoons, which I also argue is a way to make this palatable to audiences. It's like, oh my gosh, new 3D animation, but of beloved characters of yours. So I've got a kind of connection to it. All of this culminates in a period of synergy, essentially, is what I talk about at the end of the book, and that's where there is no meaningful distinction between live action and animation. As such, you may not recognize. Does anyone recognize this chipmunk? Just out of curiosity, it's Pip from Enchanted, the sort of Disney spoof on Disney itself, and that's a really interesting film that starts out in 2D. Amy Adams plays the princess in that. She starts out in 2D, and then they travel to modern day New York. And so Pip becomes a photorealistic 3D chipmunk. And my argument in the book is this is precisely where Disney is interested in heading. They've abandoned basically their 2D animation unit at this point, and we are on the cusp of the wave of Disney live action remakes. The first film climaxes in a battle with like a big CG dragon. And so this is my argument here is basically this is Disney prepping in ways that perhaps it didn't know it was prepping to integrate stuff like Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe that always kind of dealt in animation as such. And here as well, you get lots of crisscrossing properties in the vein of Roger Rabbit. So I talk about Ready Player One, Space Jam: A New Legacy, movies that and the new Chip and Dale movie that kind of mash up properties at the same time. They fully integrated live action and animation. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for explaining that model through the lens of
Rodents.
Okay, so this is it's an interesting. I've never read anything quite like this before because it's essentially like a nonfiction novella. Basically, it's like a novella length kind of nonfiction book. I don't think I'd seen that before exactly. But there's a lot going on because it covers 100 years of film history in a short time, and that sometimes means that you are writing about what I would call very obscure movies. I've seen a lot of animated movies. Yeah. That's why I'm doing the interview. And there were some that I was like, what is this? So this is really just set up to ask, you weren't allowed to use pictures.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
So how did you try to help a reader understand like a really complicated visual thing with no pictures? Was that hard? What did you do?
This is incredible. It's such a good question. It was incredibly difficult. Yeah, one of the strictures of this is part of a larger series called Quick Takes that the whole missive is really like these are short, succinct, and you don't get any allowance for photos, unfortunately. And yeah, it sucks because this is a highly visual genre that I'm talking about. The way I think my answer to it is kind of what I did, which is really thinking about these films symptomatically or thematically, right? And like I say in the intro that I'm trying to read these movies as acts of reconciliation, again, between live action and animation, which I think helped, at least chapter by chapter, it helped me explain. I don't know if it helped you understand sort of what was going on in some of the weirder stuff. The other thing that I noticed with this book, though, is, and I don't know if it was part and parcel with this being a post-tenure book, which it was very much a post-tenure book. It had a different character to it. It had a different spirit. This is like the most freewheeling thing I've ever written. I gotta say, it's the most fun. I've told many people this. It's the most fun I've ever had writing anything. I've written lots and lots, and this is the most fun I've ever had writing anything. I think that my prose is rather cartoonish in this book, actually. I think that I tried, and I don't know if you'd agree, there's a lot of verbal punning. There's a lot of sort of simile. I'm trying to do things with language that I cannot, that I can't use the picture, so I've got to make the words a little livelier. So there's a lot of little winks here and there if you're paying attention, I would think.
I would say there are a lot of little winks.
That's what we're here.
That is accurate. If you know him in real life, it does read like he wrote it, which is a good thing.
That's great. Yeah.
No AI here. Okay. So now we're getting into the slightly weirder kind of questions to like kind of wrap us up and then go to the audience Q&A.
Yeah.
So you already mentioned Disney with your rodents, and Roger Rabbit is a Disney movie too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Disney touched on it. It's a
yeah.
co-production.
So just in the past month, I don't know if anyone has seen this yet. Disney has tried to do a soft pilot to revive the 1970s Muppet Show.
Yes.
Because they own Jim Henson's stuff now, right?
Brandon Crawford.
That might, yeah, it was weird. I liked it.
Islands of Great.
This might seem really unrelated, but it's really just kind of a setup to ask something I wondered while I was reading the book a bunch of times, which is, does Dr. Meikle think puppets are animation? Yes, no. To me, they kind of serve the same function as like animation might. So like, are puppets animation? Are the Muppets animated?
The Muppets are animated, absolutely. So like if you follow animation scholarship, consensus animation scholarship, 100% puppets are animation as such. They work according to different temporal rules, obviously, right? Because the trick of animation is that you are taking still images and mythically, creating the illusion of motion, whereas puppets move, generally speaking, in real time. That being said, stop motion figures are often referred to as puppets. So, it's not terribly forced. It's funny you bring this up because I wrestled a lot with kind of how to fit the Muppets and/or their kin into the book. They do pop up very
they're
briefly,
mentioned.
which was my sort of like very small concession. I've been thinking lately that one of the things that didn't make it in is that Kermit actually has a duet with Gene Kelly, who is, excuse me, my children, a slut for duetting with cartoons. He loves duetting with cartoons. So he actually duets with Kermit on an episode of the Muppet Show, and I could not quite find a way to work that in at the end. But for me, it was something about the kind of real-time aspect of puppetry that didn't quite fit with what I was after here, right? And the fact that like with the Muppets, the human presence is like just off screen. I mean, it's incredible, but it is just off screen. And what I really was more interested in here was stuff that looked alien, divorced from any kind of human reality. I mean, like for instance, in this chapter, the integration chapter, I talk about the fact that everyone in film circles wants to point to like Jar Jar Binks and Ahmed Best and Gollum and Andy Serkis as the like digital feats. I think those were easier for audiences to accept because they were humanoid. I mean, yes, sure, they were fantastic, but they were essentially.
But Gollum is a human.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. Whereas a lot of the movies I'm talking about, that's not the case. It's animals. It's stuff that's a little more sort of foreign in nature. So that's such a weird answer to your question that the Muppets perhaps too human for me to really have like taken seriously. But I don't know. Maybe
your answer was yes. I said yeah. Are the Muppets animated? Yes, no, and you said yes. So
they deserve a place. And but more curiously, their heyday, the Muppets specifically, is in a kind of vacuum for this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It's coming right around the like bed knobs and broomsticks, like 71-ish, right around there. 72 is like when they are on the rise, and that's when a lot of this stuff is faded. So they may have filled a gap that I don't quite acknowledge. I don't know.
Okay, so the reason I asked that question was, and it's also the reason that I asked the question about like shitting on the arts, is to me what makes the book interesting is, or like kind of compelling or important, is that to me when I think of like what makes something like this a cool movie to watch, it's like a juxtaposition, right? Like Gene Kelly dancing with Jerry the Mouse, like they look like they don't belong together, but they do belong together. Like the juxtaposition is intriguing. But as you keep going with your model, when you get to kind of the end, you sort of discuss that like something like Iron Man or anything that's a Marvel movie is essentially an animated live action movie, right? Half of what you see is not real, it's animated, right? But I don't think your brain thinks of it that way.
Right.
Like it's not it's not a juxtaposition at all. To you, it looks, your brain doesn't think of it as like a live action animated movie in the same way this does.
Right.
So like, does that matter? Like, what's happening there?
Great question. I think you're right that early on the spectacle is, oh, this is a different kind of imagistic register interacting with something I'm more familiar with. I'm kind of poking a hole in that, I think, in the early chapters, because I'm like, you're still watching a Hollywood movie. A musical is also 1 inch or 2 inches off the center, right? But you don't sort of recognize the fantasy. So I talk about the way that animation is drawing forth the fantasy that's already implicit, incipient in most Hollywood productions. Like even the most realistic of Hollywood productions is highly manufactured in nature, and that's what I appreciate about this. Does it matter? I feel like let's make a date to come back in a few years
Okay.
because the title you haven't brought up is Mufasa, right? Like
Yeah.
so and the Lion King and those were movies that as Chris
Right.
Holiday,
You
wonderful
made a
animation
prequel
scholar.
to your animated movie, but you pretended it wasn't animated.
And what's uncanny about those is, yeah, Chris Holiday, great animation scholar, talks about how those are marketed as live action, right? And so audiences are primed to sort of respond to them in a live active terms, and yet I think it's very disconcerting that when they like open their mouths and sing in the waves and have slight sort of facial. Have you seen though? I'm just curious. The live action Lion King. Okay,
It's weird.
it is to me like the most avant-garde, like almost the 21st century. I've seen it in 3D. I think it is so.
I don't know
so
if I call it avant-garde, but it's strange.
It's
a
really,
strange
really
pull-up.
strange. So are we headed there, especially with AI? For anyone who saw the kind of Brad Pitt, was it Brad Pitt and
Brad Pitt and Tom
Tom
Cruise having a
Cruise
fight.
battle, right? Which again, that is animation. I mean, that is straight up animation. So will we be in a sort of different reality there? My interest at the end is that like I don't think Hollywood wants you to distinguish between the two, right? And I think especially if you think about Disney in particular, they really want you to move pretty seamlessly. Like Steven and I talk about Star Wars all the time, and we're cheered that Dave Filoni make Star Wars the cartoon. I think as Steven said that it was always meant to be. I think it's in Disney's best interest and any studio's interest that you don't actually make meaningful distinctions between live action and animation, so that one is not restricted to sort of the kiddish realm, right? And the other thing is for more, serious like film fans. And that's what they're kind of playing at with like their live action remakes and things like that. Where, like when you watch the live action remakes, you might think they suck, but like, do you recognize animation in them as animation?
Well,
I
this is
don't
just
know.
me. I think it depends on kind
I
of
don't
what
know.
this is just me. I think it depends on what it is. Like
Yeah.
Beauty and the Beast one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good
Because
example.
there's
Yeah.
like a human woman walking around with nothing animated about her.
Right.
And then there's crazy stuff.
But I
But
think
some of the other ones, no, I would say maybe not.
again, like one of my favorite sentences in the book is where I talk about how people were so angry when Disney bought Marvel and they bought or when they bought Fox and when they bought Marvel and that they were so worried that Star Wars was going to become Disney-fied, and they were so worried that Marvel was going to become Disney-fied when the opposite has happened. The Disney back catalog has become more marvelous, right? I think is what I'd say, right? And it looks more like Star Wars. So like
It
that's
definitely looks more like stuff.
that's just Disney gravitating toward the prevailing animated sort of modus operandi, like that modus operandi. So yeah. But I'll see you in a few years.
Yeah, we'll see when for chapter 4. So this is the last question, and then we're going to do audience Q&A, and I have no idea how much time this has taken because we didn't
No,
practice
you're
this.
good. You're good.
Great. And I forgot my phone. So when you get to the end of the book, you sort of start suggesting that what's happened recently as like popular intellectual property has been bought by a bunch of mega corporations like Disney, not only Disney, but like Disney.
Yeah.
And we're getting more and more comfortable. I think you argue persuasively with this weird fusion of things. But you kind of argue that animation is sort of starting to overtake, as you were almost saying now, live action.
Yeah.
Not just though in a movie, but in like real life.
Yeah.
Like a theme park, for example. Or you kind of argue that animation is starting to overtake our real life.
Yeah.
And that is kind of where the book ends. And it made me wonder, explain. What do you think that means for the future of our human lives?
It's a great. I mean, it kind of goes.
Sorry, that was a big. What does it mean for our human lives? But go ahead.
I mean, it goes back.
Answer whatever you want.
It goes back to what I was saying about the kind of silent or quieter integration of animation into our day-to-day lives. Like again, just like take stock of between here and your walk to your car or your walk home or whatever the case may be. Like how many places? Like I keep seeing animation in the reflection of the billboard.
Yeah.
Like right there. Just like count it off. To go back to the business side of it, if I can stay there for just a second, because that's where I'm kind of comfortable. Like I do think it's notable that this is where Disney is like putting its money is actually in like experiences, right? Like in the theme parks are the biggest money maker, and that is where it's like diverting its energies. Universal's obviously doing the same thing with Epic and the kind of Universal Studios cohort. So like even Netflix, and this is a paper yet to be written, but I'm really interested in the way that Netflix wants to make itself like material in distinct ways. So like I do have a paper where I reference Netflix and chill. One of my favorite ice cream flavors of all time, I have to say, but like the way they use Ben and Jerry's to ingratiate themselves. It's like peanut butter, I think there's some pretzel in it as well, and brownie bits. It's so
So it's just Ben and Jerry's Chubby Hubby with brownies.
I think it's like chubby with
Okay.
brownies.
I would like that. Anyway, sorry,
But
keep
it's
going.
Netflix and
That's
chill.
not what we're gonna talk about, everybody.
No, but so like that was the way they ingratiated, like they made their presence material. So like you go to the, Netflix only lives in the cloud until you start seeing it at the grocery store and it becomes like a brand with which you are more and more familiar, right? Which again is the kind of arc that I'm tracing here. So Netflix just opened last December, I want to say, I think it's called Netflix House, right outside of King of Prussia. If anyone wants to take a road trip, where they're just going to stage different live experiences that are tied to their shows like Squid Games, Stranger Things, K-pop, whatever the case may be. So it's really, I'm curious to sort of see where, especially who knows if the Paramount or the Netflix Warner Brothers merger, whoever ends up with whom, I'm very curious to see how they make their presence known in the sort of experience economy, so to speak. So yeah, we'll see.
Which is what you think is gonna happen.
Which is kind of what I think is gonna happen.
All right.
Sure. Yeah. I think it'll keep moving outside of Orlando, outside of Anaheim, and further, kind of closer and closer to us. I mean, outside King of Prussia. It's already outside King.
This is a really weird place for that.
So strange.
So again, this book is called The Live Action Animated Film. It is part of the Quick Take series. You can get it here at the RLB library, or you can buy it from Kyle or the internet. So round of applause again for Kyle. And now we can do some Q&A, and that will be a really convenient place to edit the video. Hopefully everyone online could actually hear all that. Tell us how well you can hear it, people online, just for my own future reference. Anyone?
Let's see. So well, thanks, Ian.
Amazing.
Hey, buddy.
Great to be a loud librarian.
I want to say really briefly, sorry.
Yeah, go.
Self-promotion. Yeah, you are welcome to grab a copy from me today. I can give it to you at a discounted rate of a mere $13, which is the author rate. If you're too embarrassed. Also you can please take a sticker if you don't, even if you don't want the book. If you scan that QR code, you can get it for the author rate through Rutgers University Press website, and they have lots of great books, including Josh Davis's co-edited Baltimore. Someone help me remember that title. What is it, Jenny?
So something about
Against the movement of the civil rights book.
No,
The
that
other
one.
one.
it's the edited collection.
Yes, the edited collection. I'm blanking out, but look up Josh Davis and put him in your
Okay,
card too.
can you tab back to the?
Oh, yeah.
Just so that I can see if it picks up the people asking questions in the room.
Absolutely.
If not, I'm gonna,
Oh,
because this mic isn't what we're actually using, so
You know what I'll do is I'll just kind of.
just say your question and we'll
Both of
see if you show up on the subtitles, is what I wanna do.
There we go.
are you calling on me?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yes.
Um,
Jenny, Dr. Cohen first, yes.
3 questions, but 2 of them are really fast. 1, what is the dragon on the cover?
No.
2, what is the weirdest, most obscure movie that you wrote about? And 3,
Oh, do you want him to answer that or not?
I won't
Well,
like.
okay, great.
and then
Yeah.
the question is sort of a methodological question, like,
Yeah.
the film professor versus the English PhD.
Yeah.
Like, to what extent does your English PhD guide you as you
Yeah.
approach these films? I'm sure you get that question all the time, but I've never.
Yes,
answered it, so-
let me-
I've been keeping track, so you're gonna answer question 3 first.
I'm gonna go.
Methodology.
Let me start there. We'll work back to the dragon. Yeah, that's such a great question too, Jenny. For me, one of the great pleasures of the book, and maybe why I had so much fun writing it, is because it took me back to close reading in a way. Like, it's funny because it is this huge, wide-ranging survey. I could show you my Google Docs where I have so obviously like a bunch of films ended up in here, but there are many more that I did not make the cut. So I have a crazy document from, again, this was like pandemic times, and I remember like the buildings were only open to us at a point, and I would come in and just watch movies by myself, take notes on them, and then if they were interesting enough, they would end up in the book somehow. But really, and it goes back to Mike's question about like how did you paint the picture? I had to do a lot of kind of motivated close reading in a way that I have not really been able to do. I didn't really in my first book, which is similarly wide ranging, but is really not invested in close reading as praxis. I really got to come back to that. So it was a delay because that is where, my English kind of training is. Yeah. Not that different from what you do, obviously.
Alright, what do you think is the most obscure thing
I
in
think the
here?
weirdest thing
Weirdest or most obscure? Okay, great.
Okay, the one that like really tickles me that I love to tell people about was this movie that I'm totally blanking the title of it, but it was a movie that was remade in the wake of The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. Okay, so there was a movie that came out starring the guy who played Sinbad is like in the film. And it looks so much like Sinbad that the original producers of Seventh Voyage sued this guy. So in order to avoid suit, he re-edited the film as a musical. So if you watch it, what's it called? Why am I
Is that
blanking
when
on it?
Jack the Giant Killer?
Yes, Jack the
Yeah.
Giant Killer. Thank you so much, Mike. If you watch it, Jenny, it's hilarious because it's like dubbed over in the most awkward ways possible, where people are like singing lines, like there's kind of like a rock opera at some points, and then at other points it's not. For my purposes, it was perfect. This is one of the films I remember watching right across from my office, one of those pandemic days. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is great because that whole chapter is about how primarily during the synchronization phase, you see musicals where two characters are dancing together, or you see fights where they're dueling. Duels and music and duets are basically the two forms that predominate. And this movie had both of them, right? Because it was combining the Harryhausen, like, we're fighting dragons, and then suddenly
But we're singing.
and I was like, got it, that's it. He's close. So that was for me.
Yeah, and my answer, if we ignore the ones that are like from the silent film era or like extremely early sound, which of course almost nobody who's not a film professor is going to have seen. My answer is absolutely Dangerous When Wet.
Yes.
From 1953, and it apparently features a scene not unlike The Anchors Away.
Yeah.
You know, Dancing with the Mouse, except more like a Bubsy Berkeley swimming
Esther
number
Williams,
with
absolutely.
with Esther Williams. Like,
Yes.
what? That just sounds like a fever dream, not a real movie that somebody.
These are post Anchors Away, so Dangerous When
Yeah.
Wet, and then My Dream Is Yours is the other big one. So Tom and Jerry are in Dangerous When Wet. Bugs and Tweety Bird are in My Dream Is Yours, and they were definitely inspired by Anchors Away and the sort of success of that to the extent. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, we think of those as obscure, but like Dangerous When Wet was pretty popular because you know,
But it's obscure now.
It's obscure now.
25, it's like, what?
Yeah, well, I guess we still recognize Gene Kelly. Esther Williams though was like, you know, absolutely, and like her swimming pictures were huge. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Have you
And
watched
then-
it since you were?
No.
Okay.
You gave me this book like 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago. No, I didn't go track down
Good.
Dangerous When Wet.
Yeah.
Past fortnight.
That's the weird.
And what's the dragon?
Okay, the dragon, I laughed, Jenny, because this was really contentious. Of course, I wanted a bunny. I wanted a rabbit because
Yeah.
the whole darn book is every chapter begins with a nod to Roger Rabbit. And so I was like, I want a rabbit. Of course, Rutgers was like, okay, well, there was one of the weirder emails I've sent where they were like, what do you get an icon on the cover, what do you want? And I was like, well, it maybe I want a rabbit. It could be a mouse because there's a lot of Mickey, there's a lot of Disney stuff. It could be, I also suggested like an ink, like a pen in an inkwell, which would have made a lot of sense, I thought as well. And they were like, none of those really played. The dragon really plays well. And dragon.
There's several dragon things in the book.
Yeah, Pete's dragon obviously is like in there and a couple others, but I was like, dragon. So I was like, fine, I will. They were like, the dragon looks best. I was like, I'm fine with that if you let me stick in a line about the How to Train Your Dragon remake.
Yeah.
So there is a sentence in the book where it's like, I was like, I will only feel calm if I have some mild justification for there being a dragon on the cover. So yeah, there's a sentence about, which is actually another paper yet to be written, that How to Train Your Dragon is the first live action animated remake of an entirely computer animated film.
Yeah.
Right, so all the Disney stuff is 2D to live action.
Yes.
How to Train Your Dragon is different, and there's a paper also I really want to write about. I went to the How to Train Your Dragon land at the Isle of Berg at Epic Universe, and that is absolutely. It talked about integration of like animation. It is mind-boggling what they do there. So I have to write about How to Train Your Dragon to justify that. I like it. It's cute. It is cute. It's cute.
I think Professor Laban's got the next question.
Could you all go back to the slides with the Anchors Away?
The rodents?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
So I was curious, Kyle, about how people experience the difference between these kinds of live action animated films.
Yeah.
You know, looking at Anchors Away, it almost looks like Jerry is a sticker.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
on top of photo.
Which essentially
Which
he
he
is.
probably was.
That's
literally drawn on
that's
the
great.
right.
Absolutely, yeah.
But when I look at something like that, it has an almost like, and this would be true in Roger Rabbit too, an almost like Kantian breaking in or something.
Yeah, that's a better way to describe my juxtaposition
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Wonder has broken into the
Yeah.
live world, right? But, you know, Jerry can't touch the curtains back there, right? He's sort of part of the mise en scène, but sort of not, right? If it rains in the theater, only one of those characters gets wet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But here, these other ones,
Yeah.
I'm curious about what it does to Wonder because it makes
Yeah.
the human character actually seem more animated. So when like the chipmunks touch his shirt, what happens to the shirt? The shirt becomes they have to animate that shirt, right? Or they have to do something that makes us feel more like simulacra.
Yeah.
So what happens to Wonder? Like which of these kinds of things generates more wonder in the reader or in the viewer?
Great question, Stephen. I mean, I tend to agree with you. Anchors Away, I think, like looks the most remarkable. Let me fixate on Alvin and the Chipmunks for just a second, because part of what I argue, and these were the films for me that like I was like, I'm doing a service here because no one is going to write about these. No one is going to write about these movies, and thank God for my kids who sat through a lot of it. We watched all the Alvin and Chipmunks together.
None of which are very good.
None of which are very Yogi Bear, the Woody Woodpecker. I mean, there's a lot out there. Anyway.
Oh yeah, that's another answer to the obscure. I had no idea that a Woody Woodpecker movie was made like 10 years ago, and it sounds like
that's more reason than that.
Bizarre.
It's
like
really
what?
Really
Why would anyone think anyone wanted to pay money for that?
No, I think what's right just
no, anyway,
you thought it was decent. Yeah. To get back to your question, Stephen, what's going on with Alvin and the Chipmunks is that it actually makes it feel really mundane. Actually, like that's I think part of the point. So one of the features I note of that cycle of films, including Woody the Woodpecker and Yogi Bear, is product integration. That's one of the reasons that like no one wants to touch these movies because they're just like crass, money grabs that have all this like product promotion for like Utz, cheese balls, and among other things. The Garfield movies do this as well. And I'm like, I think that's actually part of the point. I think it's supposed to make you feel like, oh, I've been living with cartoons all along. I think I say something to that effect that like, yeah, I mean, I grew up with it. They brings them home by way of Saturday mornings. Like you've been eating.
They eat the same cheese curls I ate with grandma.
Exactly. And so it makes it seem really boring, actually, in a way, really workaday. It's not very spectacular. I don't know about like our third category here because I think oscillates between the two. On the one hand, Pip, it's curious. They make the choice that he can speak when he's 2D, but he can't speak when he's 3D, right? And you'll see he is of more believable proportion than the chipmunks, who are naked when the film starts, but are clearly cartoonish. Like their proportions are cartoonish, not so for Pip. So he becomes more sort of naturalistic. At the same time, that movie does contain one of the dragons that I talked about in the book. Like it, I don't know if I actually talked too much about this, but Susan Sarandon turns into a Maleficent like dragon at the very end of that. So there is also like that is spectacular. So it kind of, I can't talk about the 50 Shades animation in front of my kids. I'll catch you after to sort of talk about that. Oh, let's use the more boring example.
Most surreal sentence in the book, the one that he's alluding to right now. Check it out, everybody.
Superman's mustache, right? Henry Cavill's mustache.
Oh yeah, they had to digitally edit out his mustache.
So that's not spectacular. You don't register that as animation, but there of course are moments in Superman that you are meant to, or Batman versus Superman that you're meant to register as spectacular. So it's like you've got different registers here. That I think is boring. The 2D stuff, I still think Roger Rabbit looks more innovative and spectacular than much of what we get today. I gotta say, yeah.
Wild question, Professor Reed.
Yes.
Your
I was
question.
just thinking about how like with your scholarship being so ingrained in like everyday culture, like do you go to these places and just want to like stop people and share with them the depth of it they're like walking past? Like I think it's interesting, like we don't often think of scholarship in this space, like they kind of stay separate for a lot of our students, as we we have one right now who's been inspired by you to like have this thesis foundation. And so I just wonder like how much you feel in this academic sense that you're kind of having to convey the seriousness and the connections to cartoons, but also when you're in those other spaces with just regular people experiencing these spaces, how you might want to pull them aside and
the question is like on the street, how do you navigate telling people about this? Like, do you want to? Do you? Yeah.
Right.
I go by myself. Megan is what. The kids did not come to Epic, and much to their chagrin, they did not come to Epic Universe with me. Not that time. That's a funny question because I feel like Mike or Steven, I mean, people who go to the movies with me could probably. I got it, but I do have to turn. I remember asking my mentor about this, but it's funny you're talking about Rick. I mean, especially with this stuff and trying to convince people this like that it is serious stuff. I think like I don't know, Steven, if you'd agree, like with our students. I feel like they are so animation pilled. You know what I mean? Like they are like animation is like a first language for them. Anime more so, I think, maybe than like strict animation, which is much more Steven's gig than mine. So I don't have. I should have said that a lot of this book, you know, I came up with the idea. I pitched it in summer 2020. My God, what a time! And then I had the pleasure of teaching a media genres class that fall. And I think like a quarter of this, all the good students, I think all the good students from that class who really did help me like think about like what was going on, you know, and they were bringing stuff to me. It was like a really sort of ideal, you know, scenario. So I would say I go alone, but also it goes both ways. Like I'm just out listening and like I part of what I love about teaching is that, you know, I would never have thought to probably follow this project to its illogical ends if I hadn't had that kind of group of students nudging me. Sorry, and students like Rick too, for that matter, who I shouted out in a paper I gave last week. Rick Palance is the student that Megan's talking about, who has done a lot of really, really cool stuff with characters as brands. And yeah, he is.
He's the one who did the weird thing that was in the building where they were the paint colors.
Yes, absolutely.
That was a really striking visual thing.
So he is in the acknowledgements as well, because he obviously, you know, I was working on this while he was working on his stuff, and we had lots of very, very fruitful exchanges.
I feel like we should like de-accession some of that art you all put in that hallway and like bring it over here to the library sometimes. It'd be really interesting.
We do a lot of
Yeah, I always think that hallway is
Very cool stuff.
Other questions about this interesting nonfiction novella?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a fair question.
Oh,
But,
unfair questions are the best questions. We can edit it out if it's too unfair.
I mean, people have been thinking about and even depicting sort of things that can't, scenes and creatures that can't really exist in the real world for probably as long as there have been modern humans, evolutionarily speaking. And you know, different points in time would have meant different things in terms of their cosmology. I was wondering if you ever thought about what this kind of almost seamless blending of the real with the fantasy means for us.
What an anthropologist question.
I know that,
wasn't it?
Yeah, seems a little simple, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Again, maybe not a fair question.
I mean, what do you think, Ron? Like, yeah, because you're making me think about the sort of prehistory. You know, I'm trying to think that most of the earliest instances of this kind of blending, it's like diminutive creatures, obviously, you know, so they're not mythical. So one of the things that weirdly, I don't know, we have not mentioned is another huge inspiration for this book was when I started doing research and feeling like no one was really talking about this. There's this guy, Nick Grind, writer-director in the 30s.
Yeah, I actually almost had a question about that I edited out because it's about this like really obscure piece from like the 30s that someone wrote, and I was like, I can't ask you to explain this to the audience.
Well, it's not that he was a writer-director. He co-wrote, for instance, Babes in Toyland, the 30s version, and he wrote this essay in the Screenwriter, a magazine devoted to screenwriters, about like how he saw the future of animation, what he called animation playing out, and it's incredibly prophetic. I mean, it is absolutely, and he even talks about scenarios like Henry Cavill's mustache being removed, where he's like, you can look at Betty Crable and be sure what her chemical composition is, but you won't be able to for long.
Yeah.
Like he literally writes this in 1941. And what's interesting, Ron, to get to your question, is that like he's like, how could we put this to best use? And he's thinking all about like myth, fable. He kind of describes the project that became Jack the Giant Killer, actually, funnily enough, as well. He's like, someone should do a Cyclops. Harryhausen, obviously, you know, he does a Cyclops. So he is actually thinking very anthropologically, because the other thing he's like, this would be really good for mythical beasts, and it'd be really good for depictions of heaven and hell. Which is why this book shouts out What Dreams May Come, which I think Ian was like, hey, and I was like, yes, what a move. That is a wild move, especially now with Robin Williams being gone. That's a really, really powerful film. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not really answering your question except to say this. Nick Grind kind of agrees with you, where he is thinking like, is there something almost like primal about, you know, confronting otherness, you know, whether that's a kind of like a mythical beast or some kind of mythical realm. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about like, what's the live action animated prehistory to film, since I'm only concerned with film. What an interesting question.
Yeah. Betsy Yaris. Pull her out of retirement. She can answer that one.
Yeah,
I have another question.
All right, what time is it, by the way, everybody?
4:47.
Great, keep going.
So there's an essay by Noel Carroll that talks about horror. And one of the
Yeah.
key posits is that
Yeah.
a lot of horror that we see in film
Yeah.
are monsters that are interstitial in some way. They
Yeah.
are both human, they're the xenomorph and aliens. And this and
Absolutely.
that.
I was
right?
thinking about horror too.
Yes. So
Yeah.
why should we not view
Yeah.
the live action animated film as some subgenre of
Oh,
horror?
it is 100%. Yeah, I love that I taught that essay last fall, Stephen, in the horror class. That's so funny you mentioned that. I think, again, something that fascinated me about, I was doing the math on this. I must have seen Roger Rabbit when I was too young to see Roger Rabbit. I was born in 1984. Roger Rabbit comes out in 1988. So there's no way, but I must have seen it on VHS, like maybe the year after. And I think much like Jaws, it is a film that I saw too young and left an indelible impression upon me. And what I remember about Roger Rabbit is not like the characters like singing happily at the end. What I remember is Judge Doom revealing himself to be a cartoon and the horrific scene. Were you just telling me?
I
about
was,
this?
when we were
Where
doing
you
the
get-
prep for this, I happened to see on social media randomly, totally randomly, the scene where he gets rolled over and revealed to be a
Yeah.
cartoon, and it's pretty creepy.
It is horrific. So that
He's
so
screaming
that
a lot.
about primal, like that. Those are my connections, I think, to this particular subgenre. A lot of the films, you know, like I'm kind of glossing Harryhausen, but obviously those are predicated upon the idea that it's actually scary. And the successor to Harryhausen, if we get one, is Tim Burton, who does lots of fun stuff
yeah.
with stop motion in Beetlejuice, right? Which comes out the same year as Roger Rabbit, just to give you a sense of like where stop motion and live action are at that particular point in time too. Curiously, I'll just append to that. Phil Tibbets, animator named Phil Tibbets, did a bunch of stop motion tests for Jurassic Park. So Jurassic Park, when originally conceived, Spielberg was like, I don't know if the CG stuff is going to pan out. Let's try claymation. So those are really terrifying actually as well. But I think you're right that even the stuff with Jerry Mouse is like uncanny and unsettling in a way. Like it is, there is absolutely something Carol-esque in between, not quite alive, not quite dead about it. That being said, that's true of all animation, right? I mean, you well know this. I think it maybe just brings it into sharper relief when you see it alongside, you know, like a seemingly, I mean, G. Kelly is not living anymore, just add another layer to that, obviously, but you know, it maybe brings that into sharper relief. So yeah, there's definitely a thread. I love that question because there's definitely a thread to pull out there. Stop motion is very scary, but 2D animation can be pretty freaky too. Yeah.
Well, I think the stop motion, like, it's better suited for like a horror thing, right? Because it looks inherently a little herky-jerky.
little
Even if it's
herky-jerky,
really smooth,
exactly.
it still looks like a thing that's not alive, which is inherently unsettling, right?
I don't think CG is that scary. I mean, that's actually because I feel like if there is a weightlessness to it, like there's a real difference. Speaking of something else I saw too young, but it left an indelible impression on me was Clash of the Titans. I was obsessed with Medusa and the stop motion Medusa and that was a Snake Kid. So that left a big impression on me. Much like Mary Poppins, and there's one I'm forgetting here. It gets remade in CG, right? So there is a Clash of the Titans, and it's
Liam Neeson.
yeah, it's just it does not. I miss the practicality, you know what I mean? I miss the practical effects, I should say. I miss the weight sort of those, and I'm not the only, you know, film or animation scholar who kind of thinks that way. So it's something about materiality, you know. There's absolutely something to that too.
I'll never forget the day when I learned that Shaun the Sheep is a horror mythology. Thank you, Stephen. Anyone else? We got time for one more question.
Oh yeah, Coraline too. Rachel's saying Coraline freaked me out more than most horror movies.
Coraline. Yeah.
Oh, and Rachel said the dragons being thrown during. Oh yeah, the Olympic dragons. Yes, another dragon connection. Yeah.
All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, we can end the recording here. Thank you for being our guinea pig, Kyle.
No,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
So we have two more left.